time of the year when you should be trying to go through your freezer and your pantry and find those things that you prepared last year that you need to use, because for best quality, canned food and frozen food both should be used up within a year. So today I'm making something that will use either canned or frozen, or fresh if you have to have it, or perhaps a mix. It's called cottage pie. Real similar to shepherd's pie, except I'm using ground beef instead of ground lamb or mutton. And you can call it shepherd's pie if you choose. I have about a pound of lean ground beef here that I've browned up with a cup of onion and cooked it for about 5 minutes until it was no longer pink. But we're going to cook it a little bit longer, so if it still had a smidgen of pink in, that would be fine. I'm adding 3 cloves of garlic. I'm going to stir that together real briefly. We don't want the garlic in there too soon because we don't want to give it a chance to scorch, but we do want it in before we add some of the other things so that we get a little bit of browning on it, and so we get a little bit of flavor development going with it as well, and it's well blended in when we add the other things. Now, as I mentioned, you could do this with leftover vegetables, you could do it with leftover meat that you've already got browned, so it can be a very, very rapid thing to get ready to go. I have here a cup and a half of carrots. Now, these are fresh carrots that I have actually peeled and cut to prepare for this, so they're going to take a little bit longer to cook than they would if you had leftover carrots or frozen carrots or canned carrots. Now, I've also got a cup and a half of green beans. These are canned green beans, and a cup and a half of canned corn. Now, I am using a commercial variety of both corn and green beans. If you're pulling them out of your pantry, then you need to make sure that you cook it the appropriate length of time here. We need to make sure that you've reduced the risk of botulism toxin, and that happens by cooking for a minimum of 11 minutes at a boil. Well, we're going to bring this up to a simmer and cook it for a period of time long enough to tenderize the carrots, which may or may not, depending on the form of carrot you have, be long enough to take care of that. So if you're using canned carrots and canned corn and canned green beans, I would really recommend that you put them into a saucepan, bring them to a boil, and let them boil for at least 11 minutes, adjusting for altitude as you're required to do with home canned food, increasing the time by a minute for every 1,000 feet you're above 1,000 feet, so that you actually make sure that you eliminate the risk of botulism toxin. If you're using commercially canned products, you don't need to do that. I'm going to add just a smidgen of salt to this. I just want to do a little bit at this time. And if you're using, I used no salt added vegetables. If you're using the type with salt added to them, you probably would not need to add any salt at all. I'm also going to add about 1/4 of a cup of broth because I have carrots that are going to need to be cooked. I want to make sure that I have enough liquid in here. You could also do this if you're, or I would recommend that you do this if you're using canned products, but rather than use broth, you could use the liquid that came off the green beans or the carrots or the corn that you've got, so that you save some of that liquid and save some of those nutrients as well. We're going to let this simmer for long enough to tenderize the carrots. So again, so it's going to depend on what form of carrot you have. If you're using frozen vegetables, it needs to go long enough. We're going to leave it on there for probably 7 to 10 minutes. With the thickness of the carrots that I've got, but we'll come back and check it from time to time. Okay, after your 5 minutes or 7 minutes or however long it takes you to get your carrots ready to go, then you're on to the next step. We're going to add 1½ teaspoons of a couple of different herbs. Now, these herbs are traditional with shepherd's pie or cottage pie, both of which are basically British. And so I'm adding 1½ teaspoons of dried thyme and 1½ teaspoons of dried rosemary. And I'm doing the rosemary now. I'm trying to crush it up just a little bit because I want to help get some of those flavors out a little bit faster, since it's going to receive more heat, but not while we're on the stove top. And then we also are going to do the same with the thyme, again 1½ teaspoons. Now, I did not, as I looked for the origin of both shepherd's pie and cottage pie, never did find out whether it's truly British or whether it just shows up in a lot of places. I kind of suspect that it's British, and they took it lots of places as they traveled around the world. The cottage pie actually came first, and it's generally one with beef in it as opposed to mutton, which was the shepherd's pie. Let me grab my pot holders here, and We're going to simply transfer this. Oops, I want to stir in a little bit of pepper also. Got about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon, depending on how much pepper you enjoy. Make sure you stir it in fairly well because you don't want one person to get it all. Now, the time that we left this would not have been enough as 7 minutes just to tenderize the carrots. Wouldn't have been enough to take care of that botulism toxin, so that if you're using the home canned version, you need to make sure that you take that extra step. You can, however, change the types and varieties of vegetables that you use in here. These are fairly traditional, but like all older recipes, it's kind of like a salad, and whatever you like or have on hand is what you can put in there. You can also do this somewhat ahead of time and have it this much ready to go. You could even put this much into the freezer, but the potatoes that we usually put on the top are something that you don't want to put in the freezer because they don't freeze well. So you'll need to prepare those and make them right before you're ready to go. Now this is done depending on what school of thought you're from. I prefer to make the mashed potatoes myself, but you can make them ahead of time and have them left over as well. Makes a good Monday night meal if you're having mashed potatoes for Sunday dinner. The idea of going all this trouble for a homemade, home-prepared dish and then using instant mashed potatoes has just never really blended well for me, but it is something that you could do if you wanted to or in a pinch. You could also, if you chose, rather than mashed potatoes, you end up with something that might not be called cottage pie, but while the base is still hot, you could put biscuits, either drop biscuits or homemade rolled biscuits on the top as well, and then it becomes a meat pie as opposed to a cottage pie. This is going to go in the oven at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes, so it has plenty of time to heat through. And while that's in the oven, if you choose to, you may want to serve it with gravy. You may want to make it one time and decide whether or not it needs the gravy. Some people think that it's a little bit dry without it, but if you add a little bit of stock or a little bit of liquid to the meat base that you have underneath, you can even make some gravy, then blend that in by having the gravy ready to go and folding it in. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of gravy over the top. Very simple, really fairly quick as well. I hope you'll give this one a try. It's Cottage Pie. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.